Hospitals never sleep. Not really. They just dim the lights and hum through the night with their machines and ghosts. I was lying there, thin hospital gown, for in my arm, the monitor's rhythmic beep whispering, "You're still here," barely, when the phone rang. The sound sliced through the sterile quiet like a blade. 2:08 a.m. It took effort just to reach it, the plastic receiver cold against my cheek. "Mom," came the voice. Flat, measured. "Mary." My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but panic. "Sweetheart, it's late." "What's wrong?" "I'm getting married tomorrow," she said. There was no joy in her voice, no excitement, no softness, just clinical detachment, like she was notifying me her flight had been delayed. "I'm sorry." I pushed myself upright, pain lighting up my ribs. "Married." "In Vegas. Leo and I made the decision tonight. There's no point waiting." "Marry what?" She cut me off, and I sold the apartment and the car. The beeping on the monitor sped up. I placed a hand to my chest, the ache coming not from the heart attack I was recovering from, but the words themselves. "You sold the apartment." "The one you gave me," she clarified, "and the car from graduation." My mouth opened, but no words came. It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how casually she delivered it, like an errand she'd checked off. "The money will help us with the wedding and the honeymoon," she added. "Mary, wait," I finally managed. "You can't sell. Legally, the apartment is in my name." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Leo says that's just a technicality. We already signed with a buyer. It's done." I could barely breathe. I glanced toward the nurse's call button, but didn't press it. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would you do this while I'm in the hospital? Why not talk to me?" "I am talking to you," she said coldly, "but you never listen. Leo says you've kept me tied to your money, that you never trusted me to live my own life." "Oh, Leo says." I nearly laughed, but it came out as a dry cough. She continued, unbothered. "He says this is how we start fresh, on our own terms. No more being your daughter. Just Mary, a wife, an adult." "You are my daughter," I said. "Nothing you do changes that." "Well," she said, "not anymore." Then she hung up, just like that. I sat frozen, the dial tone echoing against my ear until the nurse came in. She thought my monitor was glitching because the beeping had gone erratic again. I told her I was fine. I wasn't, not even close. I stared at the pale blue curtain, swaying slightly in the air-conditioned breeze. So, that was it. My daughter, the girl I raised alone after her father passed away in a car accident when she was 11, had just wiped her hands clean of me. On the same night my cardiologist told me I'd narrowly avoided bypass surgery. She had sold the car I gave her, the apartment I protected in my name, and whatever part of her soul allowed her to say all that without a single tear. But as I lay back, heart still thudding from betrayal, I realized something. She'd forgotten one detail. The apartment, the same apartment she thought she had successfully offloaded, wasn't what it appeared to be. It was never just an act of kindness. I had drawn up those papers myself, added provisions, traps if you will, because Mary had always been impulsive. And Leo had charming grifter written all over his cologne-soaked smile from the first time I met him. So when I gave her that apartment 2 years ago, I included a clause buried in the paperwork. A legal booby trap. A reversal clause that triggered automatically if the unit was sold within 5 years without my explicit sign-off. She didn't know. Neither did Leo. They thought they were clever. But I'm not called Elaine the Meticulous for nothing. By the next morning, I was already planning my discharge. The doctors were hesitant, but I assured them I had help and would rest. I lied. There was no help coming, but there was no rest to be had either, not until I handled this. I called my lawyer first. Janice, smart, discreet, and savage when needed. "Elaine," she said, "I've already seen the notification from the registry. Your property's been transferred to a shell buyer. Fast-tracked. Sloppy work. Can we stop it? Not only can we stop it, Janice said with delight, we can void the entire deal. That clause you buried in the trust? Ironclad. This isn't just civil, it's fraud. And the car? Registered to you. Transferred without permission. You'll get it back. Maybe not today, but soon. I closed my eyes. Relief wasn't the word. Not yet, but something colder. Validation. I wasn't crazy to be cautious. I wasn't overbearing. I was right. They had stolen what wasn't theirs, but they were about to find out who they underestimated. That night, I had Caroline, my neighbor and friend, help me home. She brought soup and silence, the best kind of comfort. She didn't press for details. She just set my medicine on the tray and handed me a warm blanket. And then she asked softly, "Do you want me to unfriend her for you?" I gave a small smile. No, let her keep the audience. It'll hurt more later. 3 days passed before Mary called again. This time she didn't sound cold. She sounded angry. Why is the sale being reversed? Leo says the funds are frozen. What did you do? I sipped my tea, cradling the phone. Oh, I just read the contract again. Turns out there's a little clause. You tricked me. No, Mary. I protected you. From yourself. From Leo. From this exact disaster. You always think you're smarter than me. No, I said. But I am smarter than Leo. Silence. Then, you ruined everything. No, sweetheart. You did that when you forgot who wrote the blueprints. I ended the call. But this wasn't over. Leo wasn't the kind of man to walk away quietly. And I wasn't the kind of woman who forgave quietly either. They had started a fire. I had been recovering. But now, I was wide awake, and I was bringing the water and the flame. I used to think the hardest thing in motherhood was letting go. I was wrong. The hardest part is watching your child throw away the life you built for them, and then blaming you when the ground disappears beneath their feet. 3 days had passed since Mary's midnight phone call. 3 days since she announced her marriage, her betrayal, and her intent to sever the only real safety net she had ever known. I had thought the silence after that would be the worst part. It wasn't. It was what came next. A knock at my door. I was still weak, still moving slow, wrapped in a housecoat with slippers that scuffed against the kitchen floor. Caroline had left warm banana bread and silence the night before. I was just reheating tea when the knock came. I opened the door to find a courier holding a cream-colored envelope. Elaine Brody. Yes. Delivery. Legal notice. The envelope was thick, the seal red and dramatic. Inside was exactly what I expected, but not from the person I expected. Leo had filed for arbitration. Not against me. Against Mary. His name on the petition. Hers beneath it. A financial dispute. He claimed she had withheld disclosure of the apartment's title condition, leading him to invest his own funds into wedding planning, now unrecoverable due to the halted sale. In other words, he blamed her for the fallout. Not me. Not the clause. But Mary. I stared at the signature, then again at the line item. Defendant failed to properly vet the security status of gifted property, resulting in financial harm to claimant. I should have been relieved. Instead, I sat down and shook. He was turning on her already, and she hadn't even returned from Vegas. I called Janice immediately. He's trying to separate himself from the failure, she said after reading the documents. Make her the scapegoat, if this goes public. It will, I interrupted. Leo doesn't handle failure quietly. He's asking for discovery, including financial records and private correspondence. Let him, I said. He's going to find more than he bargained for. Because Leo may have been sly with his manipulation, but he was reckless with his history. Back when Mary first brought him around, I hadn't trusted him. The way he avoided details, the vague job titles, business development, strategic innovation, all code for nothing verifiable. So I did what mothers do when their instincts raise red flags. I dug. I didn't tell Mary, of course. She would have called it snooping. But I'd kept the reports tucked away in a gray folder marked House Repairs. Inside were printouts from public court records, a sealed case from his early 20s, financial fraud charges dropped but never cleared. His previous landlord had filed a small claims suit for unpaid rent. There was even a temporary restraining order filed by a woman 2 cities over. Dismissed, but real. I had kept them in case. Now was the case. Janice read through the documents and exhaled like she'd just found buried treasure. Elaine, you could end him with this. I don't want to end him, I said calmly. I want Mary to see him. Truly, not the version she's been sold. And how do you plan to do that? By letting him unravel. I could have forwarded the files to her in a single click, but that would have made me the enemy. Instead, I printed them again, bound them in a plain folder, left them unaddressed, and mailed it to their shared P.O. box with a note clipped on the front. From your mother, who saw what you didn't, and still hoped you were right. I expected silence, but Mary called 2 days later. I picked up, unsure which version of her I'd hear. She didn't yell. She didn't even sound angry. She sounded tired. I read everything. I didn't reply. She took a shaky breath. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have listened, I said, and because it wouldn't have changed anything back then. You were already in love with the idea of him. Silence. Then she said the one thing I didn't expect. He filed against me. I know. I don't understand what's happening. You're watching who he really is. It took her less than a week to move out. Not just from the apartment they no longer owned, but from him. Apparently, he'd already drained what he could from their joint accounts, sold the engagement ring, skipped out on half the wedding payments, which were now in her name. I received a text from her, not a call, on a Wednesday morning. It's done. He's gone. Just that. No apology. No request to come over. But I didn't need either. I'd seen the quiet breaking in her voice, the tiny splinters of pride giving way to reality. It would be a long way back, but she had started walking. A week later, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in 15 years. Her name was Paula Marsh. She'd been the woman Leo dated before Mary, the one who had filed that restraining order. I saw your name mentioned in a filing. Google brought me to it. I hope it's not too forward, but I wanted to thank you. Thank me. For bringing the pattern to light, she said. He does this. He latches onto women who have safety, comfort, something to take. And when they fight back, he paints himself the victim. I sat down slowly. Mary didn't know, I said. None of us did, until it was too late. She paused, then added, You didn't just protect your daughter. You exposed him for all of us. The arbitration against Mary was dropped quietly. Leo never showed up. He disappeared just as fast as he entered our lives. Typical cowardice. But he left behind something I never expected. A daughter who was finally starting to think like me. Mary visited the next weekend. She brought groceries. Real ones. Not just flowers and apologies. We sat at the table in silence at first, sipping soup. Then she looked at me. I hate that you were right. I don't, I said gently. I just hate that you had to find out this way. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought I was doing the adult thing. Taking control. Being independent. You were trying, I said. That counts. She wiped her cheek and laughed bitterly. He said you were controlling. He's not wrong, I replied. But control without love is manipulation. What I did was love with boundaries. She nodded slowly. I want to start over, she said. I know. Do you think I can? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You just did. There's a unique kind of satisfaction that comes from restoring something you built, especially after someone tried to burn it down. My father used to call it quiet rebuilding. He was a carpenter. Said it wasn't the hammer that did the hardest work. It was the hand that knew when not to swing it. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Because that's what I was doing now. Quietly rebuilding. After Leo's disappearance and Mary's hesitant return to reason, I began reclaiming what had been chipped away. My finances, my footing, and most importantly, my place in the narrative. Mary had stopped trying to explain. That was a small miracle in itself. No more Leo said this, or I thought you meant that. She just listened, and slowly, piece by piece, I showed her who I really was. Not a bank, not a fallback, not a burden, but a woman who had sacrificed her entire adult life to make sure she never had to feel unsafe. And she finally saw it. I started by reclaiming the apartment. Not legally, it had never technically left my name, but physically, emotionally. Mary offered to move back in with me for a while, but I refused. No, I told her. That place is still yours, but this time I'll help you earn it properly. She didn't argue. Instead, she started paying monthly. Small, manageable payments, more symbolic than anything. A signal of responsibility, of maturity. And in return, I quietly transferred the title into a trust, her name included, but locked behind a clause. No selling, no refinancing, no leveraging without mutual consent. Mary signed it herself. No argument. That's how I knew we'd turned a corner. The car came back next. Leo had tried to offload it through a shady dealership. But once Janice filed the theft paperwork and submitted proof of title ownership, the transfer was reversed. It sat in an impound lot for 2 weeks before I had it towed home. I had no use for it, but I kept it. A reminder. You don't get to drive off with what isn't yours. Not anymore. Then came the tax notice. A small envelope. Harmless looking. Until I opened it. Apparently, Leo had tried one more trick before vanishing. He'd submitted paperwork with the city assessor's office, attempting to reclassify the apartment as a gifted transfer. A tax loophole move that could have, under certain conditions, triggered a reassessment and new ownership path. It hadn't gone through because the assessor had flagged it as suspicious and placed it on hold pending documentation. I didn't know this because of any alert. I knew because I went down there myself. I wanted my hands on every detail now. No more waiting for disasters to arrive in envelopes. When I got to the assessor's office, the clerk, a young man named Felix, recognized the name immediately. "Oh, you're Lane Brody," he said. "That Leo guy came in 2 weeks ago. Said the property was a wedding gift from his mother-in-law. Wanted it reclassified. Something about estate bypass." "Did he submit any documents?" "Some copies, but the notary stamps were off, and his ID didn't match anything on file. I flagged it." I leaned in slightly. "Did he come alone?" Felix hesitated. "No. He brought a man who claimed to be a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't. No card, just a folder full of paperwork and a phone number that went straight to voicemail when I tried to verify it." I handed Felix a business card with Janice's contact info. "If anyone tries again, redirect them to my attorney." He nodded, eyes wide. I started to walk away, but just as I reached the door, it opened, and in walked Leo, like nothing had happened. He froze when he saw me. So did I, but only for a second. He looked smaller, literally, thinner, suit a little too big, eyes glassy like he hadn't slept. For a moment he didn't speak. Then with a slight, mocking smile he said, "Elaine, fancy meeting you here." "Leo." I nodded at Felix. "This is the man I warned you about." Leo chuckled, "Just tying up loose ends. You know how estate stuff is." I didn't reply, because there wasn't a single word I could say that would reach the part of him still pretending this was salvageable. So I turned to Felix and said clearly, "If he submits anything further regarding parcel ID 2701, B, notify my lawyer. Immediately." Felix nodded. "Will do." Leo scoffed. I faced him one last time. "You tried to steal what I built for my daughter. Then you blamed her. Then you ran. She's an adult. She made choices. She made mistakes, I corrected, because you taught her how. He stepped closer. You act like you're some kind of saint, but you gave her everything with strings attached. No, I said evenly. I gave her everything with hope. You tied the strings. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't flinch. I didn't look back, because I had already won. Janice filed a formal restraining order request the next morning. Not out of fear, out of strategy, a legal wall, a final nail, and it was granted. Leo had 30 days to cease all contact and remove any claims, verbal or written, regarding me, my property, or my financial involvement with Mary. He didn't contest it. Of course he didn't. Mary and I spoke that night. I told her what happened at the assessor's office. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and nodded. I believed in him, she whispered. I know. I wanted him to be better. So did I. She paused. Do you forgive me? I looked at her, really looked, at the woman she was finally becoming, and I said yes, but only if you forgive yourself, too. She nodded, and we sat there on the couch, watching an old black and white film, sipping tea like nothing had ever broken between us, even though we both knew better. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Community Housing Trust. Apparently, someone had anonymously nominated me for their annual Stewardship Legacy Award. They cited my handling of private property against public interest exploitation. They didn't mention names, but I knew. It was Felix, the clerk from the assessor's office. In the nomination form, which they included in the envelope, he'd written, "She stood quietly in the face of fraud. She taught me that legacy isn't about holding on. It's about letting go when it matters most. That's real stewardship." I didn't cry reading it, but something in me softened, because all this time I thought I'd lost the respect I deserved. Turns out, I just hadn't been looking in the right direction. That weekend, I visited the apartment, the one I technically still owned. Mary met me there with paint swatches. "Thinking of redoing the living room," she said. "What color?" She held up 2 shades, one soft pearl, one moody blue, bold or calm. "Bold," said. "You've earned bold." She smiled and nodded, and for the first time since she called me that night from Vegas, I saw my daughter, not as someone who betrayed me, but as someone who finally understood what I'd been building for her all along. Not a cage, a foundation. When you survive heartbreak, real heartbreak, the kind that bruises your pride and makes you question your own worth, you learn not to chase closure. You learn to build your own. That was where I found myself now. Not grieving, not angry, just steady. I had my health back, mostly. My daughter was trying again, carefully. The apartment was safe. The car was back in my garage. And Leo, well, he was gone. At least that's what I thought, until he wasn't. It began with a voicemail from a man named Victor Denshaw. "Ms. Brody, my name is Victor. I apologize for contacting you out of the blue, but I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Leo Westman. He listed you as a former professional contact on a funding application we received last year. I didn't think much of it then, but your name has come up again in a rather concerning context. I believe we should speak. I can be reached at..." I paused the message. Professional contact? I'd never done a day of business with Leo in my life. Unless you count dealing with his debris as a form of labor, which honestly should. I called Victor back within the hour. He was direct, polite, and clearly experienced with conflict. "Ms. Brody," he began. "I run a venture capital firm. About 18 months ago, Leo Westman pitched us a tech startup, an app meant to simplify senior care coordination. It was impressive in theory. Let me guess," I said. "He had no product." "None, but he had a narrative, and he used your name, among others, to create credibility." My stomach sank. "Did he say I invested?" "Not quite. He implied you were a former collaborator in infrastructure development, said you'd mentored his product design, through your background in engineering. I'm not an engineer, I said flatly. Victor sighed. Exactly. That's when we flagged the file. He paused. But that's not why I'm calling. Leo resurfaced last week. He approached another one of our partners for funding under a different LLC name, this time claiming his ex-wife had defrauded him and that he needed capital to rebuild. He named you again. He said you manipulated property titles to ruin his credit. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. Of course he did. Victor continued, we're working with legal counsel now. But we wanted to alert you, in case he tries to pull similar moves elsewhere. His reach isn't broad, but his persistence is noteworthy. Thank you for telling me. There's more. He hesitated, then said, would you be willing to share your experience publicly? We're compiling testimony, anonymous if you prefer. It may help us prevent future victims. I didn't answer right away, because in that moment I wasn't sure what I wanted more, peace or precedent. That night, I sat on the patio with a blanket over my knees and a cold cup of tea in my hand. Mary came out and sat beside me, wordless, just watching the stars. I told her everything. About Victor, about Leo's scheme, about the offer to go public. I think you should do it, she said quietly. I don't want to look vindictive. You won't, she said. You'll look brave, and I'll back you. It wasn't the words themselves that struck me. It was the calm in her voice, the absence of blame, the quiet strength I hadn't heard in her since she was a little girl and asked me, do I have to be like everyone else? No, I had said, you get to be better. Now she was proving it. So I agreed. Victor's team drafted a statement for me to approve. I rewrote most of it. I didn't want legalese. I wanted truth. He did not take my money. He took my trust. He did not steal my home. He distorted my generosity. But the one thing he cannot take is my ability to help stop him from doing it again. I signed with my name in full, Elaine Margaret Brody, and that was that. Or so I thought. But life has a way of rewarding those who step into the fire instead of backing away. 3 weeks after the statement went live, tucked quietly into a fraud prevention newsletter, my phone rang again. This time, it was from a nonprofit I'd never heard of. Ms. Brody, we run a women's legal resource center downtown. We read your account. Would you be willing to speak at our fall event? Not just about Leo, but about how women over 50 navigate betrayal, trust, and financial control. I blinked. Me? Public speaking? You've got the wrong woman, I said gently. No, the caller replied. I think we finally have the right one. I spoke to an audience of 64 women that October. Some widows, some divorced, some like me, still cleaning up after the storm someone else made look like love. I told them everything. The call, the lie, the fake gift of the apartment, the clause that saved me, and most of all, the daughter I almost lost but didn't. Not because she was perfect, but because I chose to love her through the imperfection. Afterwards, they stood in line to hug me. A woman with silver braids cried on my shoulder, said I reminded her of her sister. Another handed me a card, said, this isn't just your story, it's ours. I realized something standing on that stage. Closure doesn't come when the villain is punished. It comes when you stop needing them to explain why. Mary watched my speech online. I didn't know until I found her sitting on the apartment floor, tissues in her lap, laptop open. You were incredible, she whispered. You made it happen, I said. She looked up at me with wide, raw eyes. Mom, I know I can never undo what I did, but can I stay on this path? The one where we're building again. I knelt down and hugged her. Not only can you, I said, but now you know how. You don't expect closure to show up on your doorstep holding a Tupperware of lemon bars. But that's exactly what happened one rainy Thursday morning in late November. I opened the front door to find an older woman, neatly dressed, olive coat damp from the mist, white curls tucked beneath a pale blue scarf, looking at me like she already knew who I was. "Elaine Brody?" she asked softly. "Yes." She held up the container like a peace offering. "I'm Margaret Westman, Leo's mother." The silence between us thickened like fog. "I know you have every reason not to let me in," she said quickly, "but I'm not here to make excuses for my son. I have something to give you. Please." I should have said no. I should have shut the door, or at the very least told her I wasn't in the mood for ghosts. But something about her voice, tired, sincere, trembling at the edges, cut through every defense I'd built. "Come in," I said. We sat at the kitchen table, two women on opposite ends of the same battlefield, surrounded by mismatched mugs and silence. She didn't touch the tea I poured her. Instead, she pulled a manila folder from her bag and laid it between us. "I found this when I was clearing out Leo's things. I think you deserve to read it." Inside was a spiral-bound notebook, thick with scrawled pages. His handwriting, Leo's, messy, agitated strokes filled with numbers, names, diagrams, and then, scattered in the margins, paragraphs, rambling ones, some angry, some almost poetic. She turned a page for me, pointing to one entry. I read it aloud, barely above a whisper. "Elaine isn't stupid. That's the worst part. She sees everything, but she won't say it out loud. Makes it harder to control the room when the smartest person refuses to play the game." I stopped, looked up at her. "He wrote this about me?" She nodded. "There are more," she said. "Some worse, some not." I kept reading. I thought if I could isolate Mary from her, I could shape her easier. But Elaine built her too well. Too damn well. I sat back in my chair, breath catching. Margaret's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I never knew the things he said to you. Or did. Not really. He's been complicated for a long time. But after reading this, I realized how deep it went." She slid another paper across the table. A letter, addressed to whomever she becomes. "Mary, if you're reading this, I've probably lost you. That's fair. I tried to mold you into something that would serve me, not something that would serve you. You deserve better. But if I had let you grow, I feared you'd outgrow me. So I shrank you instead. I covered my mouth." Tears came, slow and stinging. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because," Margaret said, "you're the only person who might know what to do with it." We sat in silence for a while. She finally broke it. "I raised him alone. His father left before he was born. I did my best. Maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe it never could be. But I watched him get sharper over the years. Meaner, more manipulative. And I let it go because when a single mother's son is successful, people congratulate her. They don't ask what it cost." I reached out without thinking and took her hand. "I know what it's like to love someone you don't always like." She smiled through a tear. "That's exactly it." She stood slowly, tucking the scarf back under her chin. "I won't bother you again," she said. "But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'd like that." And then she was gone. That night, I sat with the journal open beside me, the letter folded gently in Mary's hands. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was steady. "I feel like I've been living in a house built on someone else's foundation." "You weren't," I said softly. "You just let someone else move in without asking what they were building." She nodded, then asked, "Can I keep the letter?" "It's yours," I said. She pressed it to her chest, then whispered, "I think I'm finally ready to stop protecting the wrong people." The next day, I received another call from Victor Denshaw. "I heard Leo's mother reached out," he said. "She contacted us too, sent scans of the journal. Did you read it?" I did. He was quiet a moment. "We're formally launching an investigation now. But more than that, we're working on a panel, a discussion forum for community awareness. I'd like you and Mary to attend. Speak if you're willing." My instinct was to decline. But I remembered what Mary had said. I'm ready to stop protecting the wrong people. So I said yes. Not for Leo, not even for me, but for the women sitting in silence, just like I used to, waiting for the permission to say, enough. You never know the moment your story becomes someone else's map. You just live it, and hope the path you forge through heartache, grief, and growing pains leaves something behind. Something real. The community event was held in a modest university lecture hall, nothing fancy. Just a row of folding chairs, a plain stage, and a mic stand that buzzed faintly if touched too hard. Victor had called it Voices Reclaimed. I called it brave, especially for Mary. This was her first time speaking publicly about what happened. Not just with Leo, but with me, with herself. And I could tell she was terrified. "Mom," she whispered backstage, straightening the hem of her pale green blouse. "What if I freeze?" "You won't," I said. "But if you do, I'll be right next to you. We fall together, we rise together." She gave me the smallest, trembling smile, then nodded. "Let's do this." I spoke first, told them how my daughter had called me from across the country while I was recovering from a heart attack. Not to check on me, but to tell me she'd sold my apartment and car for a wedding I didn't know was happening. You could feel the air tighten in the room, but I kept going. I told them about the legal trap I'd set without realizing how much I'd need it, about the hurt that echoed deeper than dollars, about the moment I stopped needing my daughter's apology and started praying for her awakening. And when I introduced her, I didn't say my daughter. I said, "Here's a woman who came back to herself and chose me along the way." Mary walked to the microphone like she was walking a tightrope, but when she opened her mouth, she didn't stumble. She soared. "I used to think independence meant cutting people off," she said, "that to grow up you had to break away. But I was never taught how to discern the difference between a boundary and a wall." She paused, her voice steady but soft. "When I met Leo, I thought he was my way out. But really, he was just a mirror reflecting all the places I hadn't healed." There wasn't a single cough or whisper in the audience, only silence. Respectful, reverent silence. "I betrayed my mother," she said. "And I say that plainly, not to shame myself, but to own it. Because ownership is where healing starts." Then she looked directly at me. "I'm still learning how to be a daughter worth that kind of love. But I thank God she never gave up on me, especially when I gave up on her." I cried openly. So did half the room. After the panel, women and men lined up to speak to us. A retired school principal gripped my hand and said, "You taught me what patience looks like." A teenage girl pressed a drawing into Mary's palm, of a cracked heart stitched back together. But the most surprising moment came when a thin man in a charcoal suit approached with a hesitant nod. He introduced himself as a lawyer representing Leo's mother. She had passed away 2 days prior from a sudden stroke. But before she died, she'd left something behind. The man handed me a sealed envelope. Mary clutched my wrist as I opened it. Inside was a legal form, an endowment, small but significant. Margaret Westman had donated $40,000 to the Community Legal Center under one condition, that it be named in memory of the women who rebuild quietly. The Elaine Fund. My knees buckled. Mary caught me. The center opened 4 months later. Nothing extravagant. Just 1 floor in an old civic building. 2 lawyers, 1 counselor, 1 receptionist. But it had a wall of framed quotes from women who'd contributed to its founding. At the center of that wall hung the words Mary had spoken the night of the panel. "Ownership is where healing starts." Life didn't magically get easier after that. Mary still had triggers. So did I. But we grew side by side, like trees once choked by weeds, now stretching toward the sun again. She started her own support group for women under 30 navigating emotional manipulation. I began teaching a monthly workshop called The Grace Clause, how to protect your assets without losing your heart. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd receive a letter in the mail from someone I didn't know. Someone who'd heard the story. Someone who wrote, "Thank you. You helped me leave, or stay, or speak, or see." And in those letters I saw the ripple. From one hard night, one cold phone call, one bye. Sometimes Mary comes over, and we sit on the patio, same blanket over our knees, same tea gone cold. We talk about the past, yes, but we also dream now. "I want a daughter one day," she told me. "Not soon, but someday. And I want to raise her with the kind of love that still shows up when everything else falls apart." I looked at her and said, "Then she'll be the luckiest girl in the world." The last journal page Leo ever wrote, Victor later told me, had no ranting, no blame, just 4 words, hastily scribbled. She built her own. I didn't know if it meant Mary, or me, or both, but I do know this. I may have lost an apartment, a car, a few years of peace, but what I gained was a daughter reborn, a name redeemed, and a legacy that no one could ever sell.